At the end of the war, he and 3 other doctors went into Belsen horror camp and for 6 weeks examined over 20,000 victims of Nazi persecution.
We delve into the dark annals of history, where the pursuit of knowledge and advancement breached ethical boundaries. We narrate the accounts of 20 individuals and events where scientific curiosity superseded humanity, resulting in some of the most heinous human experiments ever conducted. This glimpse into a grim past serves as a reminder of the importance of ethical considerations in scientific research. Number 1. Unit 731 and Shiro Ishii. In the early half of the 20th century, an egregious violation of human rights and ethics unfolded in the form of Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii spearheaded this grim endeavor that blurred the lines between science and sheer cruelty. Located in Harbin, China, Unit 731 orchestrated horrifying experiments on thousands of Chinese civilians and war prisoners from various backgrounds. Shiro Ishii's reign over Unit 731 was marked by the invention of gruesome methods of human experimentation that included vivisection without anesthesia, forced pregnancies, and deliberate infections with diseases such as bubonic plague and cholera. Ishii and his team sought to understand the limits of the human body, pushing their subjects into unimaginable realms of pain and suffering. The activities within the walls of Unit 731 remained largely undisclosed until the later years, allowing Ishii and many of his team to evade justice for a considerable period, leaving a haunting void in the pages of history that speaks volumes about the depths of human cruelty. Number 2. Josef Mengele. Amidst the darkness that engulfed the world during the Nazi regime, Josef Mengele, notoriously known as the Angel of Death, emerged as a figure embodying heinous crimes against humanity. Serving as a physician in Auschwitz, a Nazi concentration camp, Mengele seized the opportunity to conduct genetic research on human subjects, predominantly focusing on twins, people with heterochromia iridum, and dwarfs. His fascination with genetics drove him to undertake appalling experiments that often involved gratuitous surgeries, injections with lethal substances, and countless other forms of torture, all under the guise of scientific investigation. His notorious experiments were devoid of any anesthesia, causing unbearable agony to the victims, with many succumbing to death or permanent disability. Mengele demonstrated a complete lack of empathy and moral restraint, conducting his experiments with a meticulous yet sadistic approach, aiming to further the Nazi ideology of racial purity and supremacy. After the war, Mengele managed to evade capture, leaving a legacy of horror and a testament to the utter depravity that humans can descend into under the banner of science and racial ideology. Number 3. Karl Klauberg. Karl Klauberg, a name forever tarnished by his grim contributions to science during the Nazi regime, was instrumental in orchestrating heinous experiments on humans, primarily focusing on mass sterilization techniques. As a high-ranking physician with access to countless innocent lives in concentration camps, he utilized his position to carry out horrifying experiments on women. Klauberg's research was driven by a perverse desire to develop efficient methods to sterilize numerous people without their knowledge, a mission that aligned with the Nazis' goal of ethnic cleansing. His ghastly procedures involved injecting chemical substances into women's uteruses without anesthesia, causing them unbearable pain and leaving many unable to bear children. His methodological cruelty went beyond the physical torment, as he systematically dehumanized his subjects, stripping them of their dignity and autonomy. Klauberg's blatant disregard for human life and ethics paints a chilling picture of a man consumed by a sadistic form of scientific curiosity, leaving an indelible mark on history as one of the many architects of the Holocaust's horrors. Number 4. Aribert Heim. The grim narrative of human experimentation during the Nazi regime continues with the chilling accounts surrounding Aribert Heim, also known as Dr. Death. His tenure at the Mauthausen concentration camp stands as a testament to the horrifying extent of human cruelty. Heim carried out a series of brutal experiments on inmates, often without any form of anesthesia. His victims were subjected to horrific procedures, including unnecessary amputations, the removal of vital organs, and injections with various poisonous substances such as gasoline and phenol, all under the pretense of medical research. His cruelty extended to personally executing patients and then seeking to establish the exact time of death through meticulous documentation. Despite the end of the war heralding a cessation to these atrocities, Heim managed to evade capture for several decades, leaving a chilling legacy characterized by an utter lack of humanity and empathy. Aribert Heim's gruesome experimentation and evasion of justice serve as haunting reminders of the depths to which scientific curiosity can descend when stripped of ethical constraints and moral compass. Number 5. Eduard Wirths. Within the concentration camps of Auschwitz during the Nazi reign, Eduard Wirths took his place among the notorious medical practitioners who wielded their knowledge as a weapon against the innocent. Occupying the position of the chief SS doctor, Wirths supervised and even personally conducted a variety of gruesome medical experiments, the details of which cast a grim shadow on medical history. While he sometimes opposed the more cruel experiments conducted by others like Josef Mengele, his complicity and active participation in the Nazis' medical atrocities cannot be overlooked. Involved in experiments such as injecting different substances into the hearts of prisoners to induce immediate death and conducting high-altitude experiments on humans, Wirth's actions were undeniably inhumane. His life came to an end by suicide in 1945, before he could be brought to trial, leaving behind a legacy marred by the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon his victims in the name of medical research. Number 6. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study. John Charles Cutler. Transcending continents, the echoes of unethical human experimentation resonated within the United States in the 20th century, exemplified by the infamous Tuskegee Syphilis Study. John Charles Cutler, a prominent figure in the public health service, played a significant role in this reprehensible study that exploited African-American men in Macon County, Alabama. From 1932 to 1972, the study deceitfully engaged 600 black men, 399 of whom had syphilis, promising them free health care but deliberately withholding proper treatment even after penicillin became available as a cure. This allowed researchers, including Cutler, to observe the natural progression of the disease, often leading to severe health problems and death for the participants. Cutler's role in this study, which blatantly disregarded informed consent and the well-being of the subjects, exemplifies a deep-seated racial prejudice and a grotesque violation of human rights and medical ethics. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study stands as a somber reminder of the sinister paths that can be trodden when scientific curiosity is coupled with racial bias and an utter disregard for human life and dignity. Chapter 7. Albert Kligman. In the annals of medical history, Albert Kligman's name surfaces with a sense of notoriety, echoing the darker facets of clinical research. A dermatologist by profession, Kligman exploited his position to conduct unethical experiments on humans. His most infamous association was with the Holmesburg prison in Philadelphia, where, during the 1950s and 1960s, he carried out a series of skin experiments on the incarcerated population. These prisoners were subjected to painful tests involving hazardous substances, including Agent Orange, a potent chemical later known for its use in warfare. Apart from the blatant violation of consent, these experiments often left the subjects with permanent scars, both physical and psychological. Kligman's legacy, thus, is marred with instances of cruelty, displaying a disturbing lack of empathy and respect for human dignity, hidden under the guise of scientific progress. His actions serve as a grim reminder of the necessity for ethical boundaries in human research, emphasizing the importance of consent and the humane treatment of subjects. Number 8. Henry Cotton. At the turn of the 20th century, psychiatry was still navigating its foundational stages, a period marked by Henry Cotton's brutal foray into the medical field. As the director of the New Jersey State Hospital at Trenton, Cotton developed a macabre theory linking mental illness to infections originating from various body parts. This misguided belief led him to perform a series of barbaric surgical procedures on patients, often without their consent. Cotton and his team would extract teeth, tonsils, and even organs like the spleen and colon, erroneously attributing them as the sources of mental ailments. Many patients succumb to complications from these unwarranted and gruesome surgeries, their lives cut short by a physician's misguided conviction. Despite the horrifying mortality rates and the lack of any scientific evidence to support his theories, Cotton continued his ghastly pursuits, leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies and shattered lives. Henry Cotton's chapter in the history of medical research stands as a vivid testament to the terrifying consequences of unfettered pseudoscience and the gross misuse of medical authority. Number 9. Harvey Washington Wiley. In the backdrop of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Harvey Washington Wiley, a chemist, initiated what became known as the Poison Squad experiments. As a staunch advocate for food safety, Wiley embarked on a mission to test the effects of food additives and preservatives on human health. He recruited a group of young, healthy men who willingly subjected themselves to a diet containing potentially harmful substances. For several years, this group consumed foods laced with chemicals like borax and formaldehyde, aiming to gauge the effects of these additives on the human body. While Wiley's intentions were to improve food safety regulations, the methodology employed raised serious ethical concerns. The participants were exposed to significant health risks, as the long-term effects of many of these substances were largely unknown at the time. Wiley's experiments eventually led to the creation of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, but at the cost of endangering the health and well-being of his subjects, reflecting the perilous nature of human experimentation without clear ethical guidelines. Number 10. Eugen Fischer. At the onset of the 20th century, Eugen Fischer emerged as a figurehead in the realm of eugenics, a field marred by pseudoscience and racial prejudice. Fischer's dark legacy is intrinsically linked with his experiments conducted in German Southwest Africa, where he sought to prove the racial superiority theories that were gaining traction during that period. His research involved studying the offspring of German and indigenous African unions, utilizing deeply flawed and racially biased methodologies to draw conclusions that fueled the propaganda of racial purity. Fischer's theories and experiments laid the groundwork for the horrific racial policies adopted by the Nazi regime, furthering the doctrines of racial hierarchy and segregation. His contribution to the pseudo-scientific field of eugenics not only caused immense suffering and injustice, but also distorted the course of scientific inquiry, steering it towards a path of prejudice and cruelty. Fischer's work stands as a chilling example of science twisted to serve malevolent purposes, showcasing the devastating consequences of racial bigotry merged with scientific exploration. Number 11. Julius Hallervorden. In the darkest chapters of human history, Julius Hallervorden holds a sinister place due to his active involvement in the Nazi regime's program of human extermination and experimentation. As a neuropathologist during the Third Reich, Hallervorden exhibited an appalling lack of morality and ethics. He seized the opportunity presented by the euthanasia program T4 to further his research on brain pathology. He collaborated closely with those orchestrating the program, which aimed at eliminating individuals deemed unfit by the Nazi standards. Hallervorden's nefarious involvement included the collection of hundreds of brain specimens from victims, including children, who were mercilessly killed during the Holocaust. He continued his research on these specimens even after the war, showcasing a blatant disregard for the humanity of his victims. Hallervorden's heinous acts stand as a grotesque testimony to the depths of moral degradation that can be reached in the name of scientific advancement, leaving an indelible stain on the annals of medical research. Number 12. William Sargant. In the mid-20th century, William Sargant emerged as a highly controversial figure in the field of psychiatry, driven by a disturbing pursuit to uncover the mechanisms of mind control. Working primarily in the UK, Sargant developed a series of inhumane treatments based on his belief in the potential to reset the human mind. These treatments often involved administering high doses of drugs, including hallucinogens and barbiturates, coupled with electroconvulsive therapy, often pushing his patients into states of extreme distress and confusion. His methodologies lacked informed consent, with many patients being unaware of the nature of the experiments they were subjected to. Sargant's career is marred by numerous accounts of patient suffering and distress, with many experiencing lasting psychological trauma as a result of his experiments. His approach to psychiatric treatment stands as a dark chapter in medical history, exemplifying the potential dangers and ethical dilemmas inherent in the pursuit of knowledge at the expense of human dignity and well-being. Number 13. Wendell Johnson, The Monster Study. Wendell Johnson's infamous monster study serves as an epitome of scientific exploration marred by a glaring lack of ethical consideration. In 1939, Johnson, a prominent speech pathologist, embarked on a controversial study aimed at understanding the development of stuttering in children. At the University of Iowa, he and his graduate student, Mary Tudor, conducted experiments on 22 orphaned children, deliberately inducing stuttering in half of them by subjecting them to consistent negative feedback on their speech fluency. This cruel study not only caused psychological trauma, but also had lasting detrimental effects on the speech and confidence of the affected children. Despite its aim to uncover the roots of stuttering, the study stands as a stark representation of the cruelty and ethical breaches that can occur when the boundaries of humane research are crossed. Johnson's monster study is widely criticized today for its cruel, manipulative methodology, leaving a lasting mark on the discourse surrounding ethical boundaries in research. Number 14. Saul Krugman, Willowbrook Hepatitis Experiments. Saul Krugman's name is intrinsically linked with a series of shocking human experiments that took place in the 1950s and 1960s at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York. Krugman, aiming to develop a vaccine for hepatitis, orchestrated experiments where mentally disabled children were deliberately infected with the hepatitis virus, exploiting a vulnerable population unable to give informed consent. This gross violation of human rights and medical ethics was justified under the pretext of scientific advancement. The experiments not only exposed the children to significant health risks, but also subjected them to severe physical and psychological suffering. Despite the eventual development of a vaccine, Krugman's work at Willowbrook remains a chilling reminder of the brutalities that can occur under the guise of scientific research, underscoring the necessity for stringent ethical oversight to protect the dignity and well-being of all research subjects. Number 15. Leo Stanley. In the early 20th century, Leo Stanley, the chief surgeon at San Quentin State Prison in California, embarked on a series of horrifying experiments that demonstrated a blatant disregard for human dignity and consent. Stanley used the prison's captive population as test subjects for his ghastly experiments that ranged from sterilization procedures to implantations of animal testicles into human subjects, purportedly aiming to rejuvenate the aging process. His obsession with eugenics also guided his endeavors as he conducted a myriad of other tests, including attempts at altering eye color through injecting chemicals into the eyes of prisoners. These actions not only constituted cruel and unusual punishments, but were conducted with utter disdain for the subject's physical and mental well-being. Stanley's career, thus, stands as a glaring example of science gone awry, driven by misguided beliefs and unrestrained by the ethical guidelines that govern responsible research. His actions serve as a grim warning of the potential horrors that can unfold when the sanctity of human life is sacrificed in the pursuit of dubious scientific advancements. Number 16. The Holmesburg Prison Experiments. The Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia became a horrifying epicenter of human experimentation from the 1950s to the 1970s, under the supervision of dermatologist Albert Kligman. Although previously discussed in relation to Kligman's involvement, it merits further emphasis on the breadth of human rights violations that occurred during these experiments. Prisoners, marginalized and without recourse, were exploited as guinea pigs in a variety of experiments involving exposure to hazardous substances, including chemical warfare agents and radioactive materials. These experiments were conducted without proper informed consent, with prisoners subjected to excruciating pain, disfigurement, and psychological trauma. Many prisoners bore the physical and mental scars of these experiments for the rest of their lives, a testament to the dark underbelly of scientific research devoid of ethical constraints. The Holmesburg prison experiments serve as a brutal reminder of the urgent need for stringent ethical guidelines in research to prevent the reoccurrence of such atrocities in the name of science, showcasing the sinister potential of human exploitation when moral boundaries are abandoned. Number 17, Nazi human experimentation. The Nazi human experimentation represents one of the most barbaric chapters in the history of scientific research. During the Holocaust, countless innocent lives were subjected to merciless experiments in the name of advancing German racial ideologies and medical knowledge. The Nazis conducted a myriad of inhumane experiments, ranging from high-altitude tests to freezing experiments, with a complete abandonment of moral and ethical considerations. The brutality and sheer lack of humanity displayed during these experiments marked a dark period where science was used as a tool for cruelty and death. Not only were these experiments sadistic, but they were also scientifically flawed, conducted without proper methodology and often based on racial prejudices and false beliefs. The Nazi human experimentation period stands as a chilling testament to the depths of human cruelty and the perversion of science, highlighting the indispensable need for ethical boundaries in scientific research to protect human dignity and life. Number 18, Guatemalan STD study. In the annals of medical research, the Guatemalan STD study occupies a disgraceful spot, illustrating the extent to which ethical principles can be disregarded in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. Between 1946 and 1948, American public health researchers, led by Dr. John Cutler, undertook a study in Guatemala where they deliberately infected over 1,000 individuals, including soldiers, prostitutes, prisoners, and mental health patients, with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases, without their informed consent. The objective was to understand the effectiveness of penicillin in treating these diseases. However, the blatant violation of ethical norms overshadowed any scientific gains, leaving a trail of suffering and devastating health consequences in its wake. The Guatemalan STD study remains a vivid example of the dangerous path that scientific research can tread when stripped of moral and ethical guidelines, serving as a stern reminder of the imperative to uphold human rights and dignity in all scientific endeavors. Number 19, MK Ultra Project. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, of the United States orchestrated the MK Ultra Project, a clandestine operation aimed at exploring mind control techniques. This notorious program involved administering psychoactive drugs, including LSD, to unwitting subjects in a bid to develop procedures and substances for mind control, information gathering, and psychological torture. Conducted under the cloak of utmost secrecy, these experiments often ventured into realms of extreme cruelty and inhumanity, subjecting individuals to intense psychological distress and manipulation without their consent or awareness. The repercussions of these experiments were far-reaching, with many subjects suffering from lasting psychological harm. The MK Ultra Project stands as a somber representation of the dark paths that governmental agencies can tread, forsaking ethical considerations in the quest for power and control, showcasing a grim chapter where scientific exploration collided with moral bankruptcy. Number 20, Sidney Gottlieb. In the eerie annals of unethical human experimentation, Sidney Gottlieb emerges as a principal architect of one of the most nefarious programs the world has seen, the MK Ultra Project. Operating during the Cold War era, Gottlieb found himself at the helm of the CIA's mind control program, orchestrating a series of horrifying experiments that sought to harness the capacity to manipulate and control human cognition and behavior through a range of brutal methods. Gottlieb's reign at the CIA in the 1950s and 1960s was characterized by an almost surreal detachment from humane considerations, as he spearheaded projects involving the administration of hallucinogenic drugs, including LSD, often to unwitting subjects, alongside other barbaric techniques such as hypnosis and severe psychological manipulation. The aim of these experiments was to pioneer techniques for mind control, information extraction, and psychological torture, all under the guise of national security. His role in these experiments went far beyond supervisory, often personally administering drugs to individuals who were entirely unaware of the nature and extent of the trials they were subjected to. Gottlieb's actions were marked by a glaring lack of ethical restraint. The experiments he conducted subjected individuals to unimaginable cruelty, often leaving them with severe and lasting psychological damage. Furthermore, His approach to experimentation disregarded any semblance of consent, as subjects were often kept in the dark about the true nature of the experiments, making them victims of deceit and manipulation at the hands of someone who was supposed to be a guardian of national safety. The infamous MK Ultra project, under Gottlieb's guidance, serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unbridled ambition coupled with a complete abandonment of moral compass. His role in this dark chapter of history points to the unimaginable cruelties that can transpire when the pursuit of knowledge and power supersedes the intrinsic value and rights of individual human beings. Sidney Gottlieb's involvement in the MK Ultra project remains a distressing testament to the terrifying depths that human experimentation can plunge into when devoid of ethical and moral boundaries. His legacy is a cautionary tale, emphasizing the vital need for stringent ethical norms to govern scientific research and prevent such monstrous violations of human dignity and life.